Welcome. This is Adam Kogan, and today I'm going to be going through my SSW rules for successful projects. Essentially, what I want to get across today is a few points that I hope will help you run projects more successfully and produce better and more maintainable solutions for your end customers. A little about me first. I work at a company called ssw.com.au. We're located in Sydney, and we develop a lot of custom development and a few off-the-shelf tools for .NET developers. We have some good clients, some large customers, and we also have some medium to small customers as well. I've been running the .NET user group, which has been through a few different names over the years. So I've been doing that for 12 years now. And I also am one of 2 Microsoft regional directors. This is my little girl, and this is one project that I hope I'll be successful on. So let's go to the very first rule. And I think that the most important rule is possibly the first one, and that is being consistent. The guy pictured here, his name is Michael Gerber. And he wrote a book called The E-Myth. And the E-Myth essentially talks about a series of different practices companies can follow. It's not very well targeted at the software industry, but there was one story in it that I found kind of fascinating. And this was Michael Gerber, and he went to a hairdresser to get his hair cut. It doesn't look like he needs much of a haircut these days, but when he was a bit younger, he went to this hairdresser's and he was offered a cup of coffee. When he had a nice cup of coffee, and then they took him to his seat and they said, "Would you like a shampoo before we cut your hair?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know." And they said, "Well, it's usually better to always get a shampoo first because you end up with a better haircut." He said, "Okay, fine." And then he said, he was asked whether they'd like to use clippers or use scissors, and he said, "I don't mind too much." And they said, "Well, usually if you use scissors, you get a better haircut." He had a haircut. He said it was fine. And then at the end, they offered him a chocolate, and he went on his way. 6 weeks later, he went back to the hairdresser's. And this time, he wasn't offered a coffee, but but the girl was still there, even though she'd offered him coffee last time. He went and got his haircut. They washed his hair. The girl this time did use clippers for part of the haircut, and he received no chocolate, and on his way he went. He turned up the next time, and this time he was actually offered a glass of champagne, which he refused, and no coffee. Went and he got a no wash for his hair, and they used scissors, and no chocolate this time. He basically said that although he enjoyed all the haircuts, he never went back again because the place felt so random. So I think that the main point of this story is if you're running a team of developers, or you have a series of different clients, you want the experience to be fairly consistent. If a client rings up to report a bug, you want the way that bug gets solved to be reasonably consistent. Now, the very first thing that developers will talk about when they come across such a rule is essentially that it might hamper their creativity. I will say, on the contrary, I think it would be the opposite, because one of the very first things that this allows is it allows you to be more productive. You don't have to, when a project starts, let's just say we're talking about a Windows Forms project, you don't have to start discussing to the client, do you want MDI or SDI? Let me tell you the pros and cons of both methods. Or do you want to use data sets or business objects? Let's talk about the pros and cons of that. So what will happen will mean that the customer doesn't have to go through a whole series of different decisions, and they can get to their real problems quicker. And because what we're giving the customer by default is your best experiences and your best practices over time, you're going to end up with a better quality application. So I would basically say to a client that, all right, these are the series of decisions we need to make. You can use MDI or SDI, but we typically recommend SDI for these reasons. And you can use data sets or business objects, and we use data sets for these reasons. And that allows the decisions to be reasonably quick, and only if the customer has an intense interest in some particular area do you need to get into a long discussion about that particular decision point. Another thing that's fairly vitally important is communication. The way that you communicate is really determines how happy the customer is going to be. But I think that the communication should be reasonably consistent. When a customer asks for a new feature, then there should be a consistent way of how that new feature is taken and actually implemented. I recommend that the customer receives an email, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail later on. Also, if a customer reports a bug, you must be very specific on the way that you solve that bug, and also whether you're even allowed to call that a bug. We'll talk about the definition of a bug, which is fairly important later on. But the best thing about all this is that you educate the customer. The best customers you have are the ones that have dealt with more IT projects over time and are better educated in the way that and have a better understanding of what's going on. And the whole goal of all these 3 points is that we get to the customer's problem quicker, because they're only really interested in their problem. They're not really interested in a lot of technical issues that developers talk to customers about. They just want you to talk to them about their problem, and so this allows you to get to the meat of the problem quicker. The next thing is talking about managing clients' expectations. One of the first things that can go wrong is a customer asks for a ballpark, and the developer gives them a range. He gives them a range and says, to get this solution done, it will be between 15 and 25 grand. Now the problem is, when the solution is done by the developer, let's just say it costs 28 grand, what do you think the developer's thinking? He's probably thinking you did a pretty good job. I said it was going to be about 25, and the solution cost just over 28, so that's not too bad. What do you think the customer's thinking? The customer's thinking, this guy is a complete rip-off. He basically has charged me nearly double for what he said. He said 15, and he's basically charged me 30K. So the first problem that's occurred is they haven't heard the same words. So the best thing to solve this problem is to not give ranges. In our company, we don't give any ranges. The developer must say a figure. If the figure's 20 grand, at least both the customer and the developer has heard the same figure. The next point is sometimes you hear people over glorify how the process is going to work. So they say to the customer, essentially what's going to happen is we're going to do this solution for you, and then we're going to come and implement it. It's going to be fantastic, and this is really going to revolutionize your business. I find it better to be a little bit more honest about the process and say, essentially what's going to happen is we're going to take your requirements. We're not going to get all your requirements. We're going to miss a few. During that, we'll try to pick up some of the easier ones and fix those. Some of the other ones that we've missed, we'll move on to the next release. Now, when we implement this process, implement the program for you, we're going to ask you to report bugs. You're going to find a lot of bugs, unfortunately. We, as developers, typically don't see a lot of we only see the obvious bugs because we use the application as it's intended. But you'll find a number of bugs. You'll find the process reasonably frustrating, but you'll report all those bugs, and we'll fix most of them. We'll give you a new version. There'll still be a few more bugs to iron out. Some of them we might move to the next release, and then we're going to import all your data. Now that data, because you understand the data better than us, we're going to need a fair bit of talking about some of the data, whether we can clean it up, and we might have to clean up some of the data, etc. So we just paint the picture as it's going to be rather than a bed of roses, because then the expectations are set a bit better. The next point is about fixed prices. Now, unfortunately, customers that have been burnt before usually plan on the next project, whatever they do, is going to be a fixed price. Now, I will say that fixed prices to a customer might appear to solve a number of problems, but be extremely wary that they don't solve everything. And in many cases, they create a lot more problems. If the customer wants a fixed price, then you must try to nail down the goalposts as best as you can. And if as an example, what we would generally recommend is that you end up doing mock-ups. We'll talk about mock-ups shortly, but the best way to fix the goalposts is to have mock-ups and have them signed off. If the project is a brand new one and they're not in the IT industry, I will typically say that fixed prices are better left alone, and you tell them that this project isn't suitable for a fixed price. Also, if the customer doesn't have additional budget after the fixed price, you can almost guarantee that this project is going to be a failure, because the fixed price, we shouldn't expect that we'll get all the issues the customer needs. And finally, the most important thing is you cannot walk out of a meeting with a customer without talking about dollars. You really need to know, is the customer willing to spend 10 grand on this or 100 grand on this? It makes a big difference as to the technology you can choose. If their budget is limited to 10 grand, there's little you can do for them apart from maybe a fairly simplistic type of system. You might even choose to use a more RAD type of environment like Access. If they're willing to spend more money, you know that you can invest more in unit tests, more in the user interface, and they have a more professional expectation. Moving along. The next thing I would like to talk to you about is the workflow. I think it's very important to explain to a customer the way that you work. Typically, when we meet with customers, we tell them this is the process. So we're talking to you today, and we're explaining to you how we work. If you'd like to move forward, what we'd like to do is, first of all, we will give you an estimate or potentially a quote for developing the very next stage. The next stage will be to develop mock-ups. Mock-ups will not work, but they will give you a flow of how the system is meant to work, and you will visually be able to see what you should expect from your application. That process may take a week or 2 weeks. It's a very important one. We will work out a lot more of the actual processes of your organization, and then we will actually get you to sign off the mock-ups. And we will take a chunk of those mock-ups and then estimate all those items in that release, and we will give you a release plan. That release plan will be approximately 160 hours. That's how we break our projects down. That will be 2 guys at 2 weeks. Then we're going to go ahead and do the real work. We're going to develop the application. We will have the internal developers test the application before giving it to you for what we call a test please. At that point in time, you're going to report a number of issues. Some of them are going to be obvious bugs, like you can't save a record with a certain type of data. That type of stuff we will fix or add additional validation. Other things are going to be things that you think of now you actually see the application. Some of them, if they're very easy, we will just do. Others, most of them, we will move into the next release. You will then sign that off, that release, and the additional emails will be what we would call triaged into different releases or into the current release. And then at the end of that release, we're going to have a quick debrief, talk about what went right and what went wrong and what we're going to be doing next. The next important thing to do with developers is to always have a debrief meeting scheduled. So when a developer chooses what items he's going to do in the current release, and the customer approves those items and changes the priority, at the end of that release, in our case it will be 2 weeks, we should be having a meeting about how the release worked. It's very, very important to learn from history. Now, most people don't do debriefs, and if they do a debrief, they typically focus on the problems that occurred and how that problem shouldn't have occurred and how they could fix it next time. I'll actually tell you to also focus on what went right. It's quite interesting that when something goes right, we think we don't need to discuss it very much. We'll just move on to the next release because things are going reasonably smoothly. I think it's very important to actually say, okay, this went right. What reasons do we think this release went well? So focus on what went right and also what went wrong. In our case, we make sure the developers have a debrief meeting scheduled for 2 weeks into the project. Now that 2 weeks ideally will hopefully mean that they've finished that release and we'll be talking about how the whole release went. If they're going overtime, which happens many times, then we still have a meeting. If it's not a meeting, it's at least a phone call, so the developer understands that on that day he calls you and says, okay, we said it was going to be 2 weeks to finish this release. We're 90% of the way through. We should be finished by Tuesday. And the reason it's gone over is because of X, Y, or Z. Now, the next thing to talk about in terms of the client is, this is vitally important, probably one of the most important points. You must, from day dot, talk to the customer about what is a bug. There is no point in the customer sending you many emails or reporting many items and everything is a bug, from a tab order to a validation message that didn't capture a certain type of invalid data. So I think you need to explain to the customer what is the definition of a bug. If the program crashes to code, that is a bug. If the program shows incorrect values based on business rules you've been given or based on data not coming back from the database, that is a bug. So as an example, an invoice that's not adding up, that is a bug. If it's missing specified functionality in that they can demonstrate in the mock-ups or the business rules, then that's a bug that's been missed. But other things like moving buttons not aligned, all these types of things, even missed requirements is not a bug. The best way I can tell you how to find out the definition of a bug is you can go to Google and you can search on SSW space bug space definition, and that includes fairly detailed examples of what is a bug. So that's Google SSW bug definition. And the last one I'm just going to talk about in this session before we take a break and move on to other issues is about knowing who has authority. Now this rule comes from definitely the School of Hard Knocks. Now, what is the best idea here is, in the beginning of the project, select a person who is known as the company champion or the project champion, but the main person that you refer to. So there's a number of responsibilities for this person, but essentially this person is the bridge between you and the customer. This person typically is an IT manager at the company or the business unit owner, and every request goes through this person. So as an example, maybe the secretary uses the application a lot. She can actually report an issue to you or a new feature that she needs, and that might sound extremely reasonable and not be a big feature to ask for, but it still needs to go through the company champion. So let's just say you receive an email or a phone call from one of the users, the developer will send themselves an email and CC the company champion. Now, in our case, we tell the company champion they have a responsibility to let us know as soon as possible if they don't like the idea of that request. Okay? So, let's take a break now. Hopefully you got a few points, and we're going to come back for part 2. Okay, welcome back to part B. We've just covered part A, and we went through a number of practices in terms of dealing with clients. We talked about the importance of consistency, managing clients, the workflow that you should explain to customers, the importance of a debrief meeting, and that you always schedule one, the definition of a bug, critical to explain to customers, and then who has authority, and making sure you have a company champion. What I'd like to cover now in part B is development practices. So I'm going to start with having a spec. I think it's fair to say that specs are a little bit like flossing. Everyone thinks it's a good idea, but not everyone's doing it. A spec is massively important because it's a lot easier to change the requirements when it's in a spec than when you've gone ahead and written code. Developers can spend many days and weeks implementing good new features, and when you go and show the customer, say, an order application, and the customer says, well, how do I deliver this order in multiple sections? Well, the developer will say, oh, I didn't really know about that. How about if I add a little combo box down here in the bottom left-hand corner, and when you select one of the items from that combo, I'll pop up a pop-up form or something like this. And what the developer's thinking about is, well, I'm just thinking about a workaround for the guy. I wish he had told me this earlier. And what the customer ends up getting is a non-optimal solution and not the best way it could have been implemented. What the developer's often concerned about is he's become attached to the code he's written. He spent some sweat and tears on some of this code, stayed up late, and he doesn't really want to throw it out. So what he wants to do is somehow keep a lot of that and just make the customer happy. Now, if this spec was in HTML, then all he would have to do is go ahead and delete a piece of HTML and put another piece back, and it would take him a matter of minutes rather than this nasty workaround that's going to live in the system for some time. So the problem with a spec can be that it becomes quite large. So the first thing that I will say is when you have a spec, now in our company, irrespective of the size of the project, we always break down every piece into 160 hours, which for us is 2 guys times 2 weeks. We find that quite optimal. Now, the second thing, or number 8 now, is using a mock-up. Now, there's many different ways of doing a specification. The common way is to write a very large document and try to capture all the business rules, explain how the UI's got to work, talk about some of the workflow scenarios, etc. Unfortunately, often that document gets delivered to the customer, goes on a shelf, and gathers some dust. A lot of the projects that I've seen like this have actually been signed off by the customer. He doesn't really understand everything, but he wants to get the project rolling. He's had a lot of conversations with the developers. He really does feel that they understand pretty much everything that he's talked about. But that is the ingredients for some failures. So what I try to do is early on decide what technology are we going to use. We make a decision. Are we going to use Windows Forms? Is this going to be a web project? Is this going to be an Access project? Whatever you choose, you do the mock-up in that technology. I don't believe in a mock-up to be thrown away. I often see mock-ups being done in Photoshop or Excel or even PowerPoint, built to throw away. I think it's better to keep the mock-up in the technology, and also for parts that aren't working and aren't ready, I think they should be clearly colored in red. so a background color of red or the button to be red. There's no point in giving this to a customer and they click on this button and it goes nowhere. It's much better just for them to say, look, you can report anything you don't like with this application except for the areas that are red. There's no point in, even in a testing phase, to say to a customer, all right, go ahead and test that, and the customer goes tools options and it gives an error, and the developer says, yeah, I already know about that. I haven't finished that area. So it's better just to say you can always report all bugs except where they're red. So let me give an example of what a mock-up might look like, a sample customer. Now this was a metal company, and this was a very simple example of a mock-up. Now, I should explain to you first, when you give an option to a customer of a mock-up, the first thing to discuss is how pretty do you want the mock-up to be. Now, the mock-up, depending on your business model, will either be charged or either be free, but the expectations need to be set. Some mock-ups by a customer might need to be very pretty. Others, you're just trying to establish the workflow. We typically give a customer two options with the mock-up. Do they want it done including graphics, or do they want it done excluding graphics? The graphics one is usually 3 times more, but will look a lot more professional. In this case, it was an Access application that wanted to move to web forms on ASP.NET, and there was a number of things that the customer wanted. Essentially, they wanted an exact copy of the Access application. So one of the first things that happened when we talked to the customer was we said, what do you want for colors? And the customer said, well, we're a metal company, Adam. We don't care about colors. Colors aren't important. We just want this exact Access application on the web. So the first thing we established is you needed to have an email and password, and then you would log into the application. Now, one of the things that the customer then mentioned is, well, if I'm in Brisbane or Melbourne, how do I actually look at that data and have the default to that? Because when it was in the Access application, I could just put it all in the local tables. Well, that meant that within a split second, we could just add a combo box onto here and said, okay, so when you log on, you might be in different cities. You can choose the branch and then log on. When we showed them, okay, so we're going to show you the open purchase documents. One of the first things the customer looked at when they looked at this is they said, oh, you know, that looks all right, but you know the ANZ site, they use blue and white and grey colours for the different details. Now, I didn't say to the customer, I thought you're a metal guy, you weren't interested in colours. I just quickly changed the style sheet and we had a look and feel that they thought was acceptable. The main idea of this is they can click through and see how the application works, even though it's not really working. Another thing that we typically do is we put all the business rules in a little XML tag at the bottom, and we mention, say, validation or specific business rules. Some people put another document and then they refer to that document. I find it beneficial, where possible, to put as many business rules and validations on the actual form. So when you go into the docket here, you can see an example docket, and then you put all the validation or business rules down the bottom. Okay. So in this case, the customer wanted to know what it would look if it was a credit. They wanted to make sure it was red, and if it wasn't a credit note, it would be the normal colours. So the main idea of this is you get an idea of the workflow, and then you sign it all off. Let's move on now. We'll move on to the next point, and this is about market research. You know, if we were in an engineering company developing fridges or whatever, most of those type of companies always do some market research. They have some girls that go out to shopping centres, ask customers what they need, etc., before they go ahead and actually build the device. With software, we typically just the developer works out what they need, and the customer talks, and off it goes. Even Microsoft, when you have a look at what they do with, say, Visual Studio, they work out what's needed, and then they develop the IDE for some period of time, and then they give you a beta version. And at that point in time, it's usually fairly long into the cycle, and basically all you can do is report bugs or suggest features for the next release. I would encourage all developers, once they've got the spec and they can can explain how the application will work is they then put it up on the web. This is impossible for all applications, but for most applications it clearly is. And so you can put it up there, and it's amazing what Google will do. Google will index that page. Somebody else looking for that type of application, I can give you an example. We built a tool called SQL Auditor, and we put up on the web all the screen captures and explained all the different features it would have. And it was amazing how many people that were looking for a SQL Server tool would find this tool, read all about what it did, and then send in 3 suggestions about, well, could it do this, or could it do that, or do you know there's already a tool that does this part of it, etc. So they're giving you free feedback. I would also say at this point in time, once the specs are up there, you start doing a couple of days of investigation before doing any code. So as an example, you look at this application. It's got customers and clients and orders. And as a minimum, you start seeing, well, they want to manage campaigns and things. So do some research and see, well, could we use Microsoft CRM for a portion of this? Or could we use, Great Plains for this? And if you're not an expert, then call up people that know the application and you can walk them through your mock-up and say, well, will it do all these? Or maybe you only need to do the chunk that can't be done by an off-the-shelf package. As a minimum, even if you don't go with one of those solutions, you'll actually get some better ideas. In many cases, you can find a company that's built something reasonably similar, and they might even customize it to a degree for your customer to purchase it. Okay, so once you've done that initial investigation, you can come back with new specs and give the customer an even better solution. Now, another development practice I think is fairly important is when you're stuck, any developer should know the 3 important sites. The first thing, I guess we'll always say that we know to Google something. These days, MSN search it. Try to find a solution to that problem. The second important thing that people often skip is groups.google. Okay, that is searching through news groups. That's vitally important that you try there. And the other important one is a Microsoft knowledge base. This is the ABCs that developers need to always search those 3 locations when they're stuck. Moving along to point 11. Some people are good at finding solutions on the web and some people aren't. I believe I'm a pretty good Googler, and I think that the reason that I can often find things that developers can't is because I often am thinking of the answer. I'm thinking of, let's just say we're trying to do something with, opening a file in .NET. I will often be able to think of a couple of keywords I would expect in the coding answer if I'm looking for a piece of code. As a minimum, if you don't know anything, you can put system.io. And so you'll be coming back with some results that would be there. So don't always think of the problem, think of the answer. And include the product name and include the technology. Now, when I can't find something, I always have this guy his name is Scott Hanselman. He's on my MSN, and he's a fellow regional director. And that guy is amazing. He can find anything. I only have to say, Scotty, do you know how to do this? And there'll be a little pause, maybe a minute or 2, and he comes back with the exact link. Now, just getting the answer isn't enough. It's always important when someone else finds something that you couldn't to actually ask them, what were the keywords you used to find that? And that can help you be a better Googler. Talking of Google, one of the sad things that many developers or many users actually have on their PC is the ability to find something on the internet much faster than finding something on their own machine. I think it's vitally important that every person installs a search utility. Now, there's 2 main ones out there. There's Google Desktop Search and there's MSN Desktop Search. So let me just give you an example of one of these. I have a 9 gig OST file in Outlook, and I could type in here something like Andrew Coates, VSTS, Sydney, and that's going to go through that, and within a split second I can find any results. That might be an email, it might be a file, but it's not okay to not be able to find things at the click of a button. Now, I prefer MSN desktop search over Google, and the reason is I like the pane on the right-hand side. Google doesn't give you that. And there's another vitally important thing about MSN desktop search. See this button here? If you've installed it, you won't have it. It's an intranet button. The intranet button, there's a knowledge base on our website about how to do this, but essentially there's a download that you can get, which is called Enterprise Search. And there's a few steps you can follow in our document to set it up. But essentially, you put it into Active Directory, and then everyone ends up with this nice little button, and they can search anything on their intranet as well. And that uses the power of SharePoint Portal Search. Okay, so moving along now, number 13. Is I always think it's better when you complete a task to let a customer know how long it took. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit later in the bug tracking tool, but even if you don't use one and you do a task for a customer, I always think it's good to say done, and that took me 15 minutes, or that took me 2 hours to change all that alignment. So customers become more educated as to how much time it took, and developers are a little bit more accountable as to, whether something like that it has a lot of business value or whether they spent way too much time on it. Number 14 is talking about extreme programming. Now, I'm a great fan of extreme programming. Extreme programming has actually 12 main parts to it. Now, there's extreme programming was invented or described initially by a guy called Kent Beck, and it has a number of very wide pieces to it. I will encourage you to read some material on XP, but there's two that I find extremely valuable. The first one is to have short releases. Keep releases really small, and you will end up with a better product because you're breaking things down and you're delivering more often. So I really love the idea how they encourage you to have small releases, and I've already talked about having releases every 2 weeks. The other thing is about having solid code, and I really like the idea how they encourage unit tests. They actually go a step further and they say you should write your unit tests before writing code. Regardless of how you do it, I think the important thing is to actually write unit tests. If someone reports a bug to you, don't just go and fix the bug. Say, why didn't I have a unit test for that? Let me add a unit test first, and we'll see what the problem is, and see if we can reproduce it, and then we go and write code to fix it. It's all right to have a bug. It's not all right to have the same bug again. There's a couple of things that I'm not very keen on in extreme programming. The main one is the metaphor. The metaphor, the idea is that many different people in the project can understand it, such as developers might have a sentence that explains what's going on in the project. The example Kent Beck gave for his first project at Chrysler was about a production line, because many people in Chrysler could understand the production line, from the testers to the customer, to the end users, to the business owners, etc. I've always found that the metaphor becomes so mixed, it doesn't add much business value. I think a summary of points of main features they're going to get with the release is probably better. Now, extreme programming also says that you should have a series of physical cards to break down the barriers of technology and have a pile of cards, and every feature that the customer asks for, you write on a card, and then the developer estimates the amount of time each feature will take, and then the customer chooses the priority. I'm not a fan of these physical cards. I always worry what would happen if you lost the cards, etc. I like technology. I think everybody from the CEO to my mum uses email, so I think that the cards can be replaced by email, and I'll give you a little demo of that in a later rule. And the other thing I'm not keen on is the pair programming. Pair programming, as defined by XP, is two people at one computer with one keyboard. At SSW, we do all work in twos. However, each developer has their own PC. And all I do, really, and all I think you really need to do, is encourage the two developers that are working together to sit close to each other. And when you walk around the office, just encourage them to can they get a little closer together? So all the pairs are right near each other. They can see each other's screen, etc. At the minimum, they're not going to surf the web all day while the other guy's working. But the main benefit I get is when someone hits a bug, you will get the natural benefit of paired programming without enforcing it. You will actually see one developer lean over to the other guy's machine. They're both looking at the one problem until they get past it, and then that guy will go back to his machine. So that's my variation on extreme programming, but I'll encourage you to read it and implement it wisely. One at a time. Don't go crazy and try to implement the whole thing. But I think it can make a massive improvement to your work practices. Now, the next point, number 15, is about getting your diary signed. Now, the reason I do this, extreme programming talks about one of the practices, one of the agile practices, is something called having a scrum meeting every morning. And you get up and you talk about what you're going to do and what you've done, etc. I actually prefer it to be done in the evening, and the way that we enforce it is that every developer's timesheet must be signed. As a minimum, it makes the developer talk to the customer or the business owner who's ever requesting this, and it forces them to have some physical content for at least 30 seconds, where the developer can ask the customer a question, or the customer can say, "What have you been working on tomorrow? Can you get onto this feature?" etc. So there's some communication, and that physical signing to me solves that problem. And also it gives the developer some time overnight to think about what they're going to be doing the next day, rather than in the morning planning it then. They've already been thinking about it overnight. They might be able to, think of some great ideas while they're, watching telly that night. So when they come in the next morning, I always encourage developers to send morning goals. That's the main things they want to get done that day, and it has a history of what they said the day before with strike-throughs through what they got done. So there's lots of things to do in a day, but what do I really need to do today? It really does encourage developers to work on the most important instead of urgent, unimportant tasks. Okay, the next important development practice is allowing a user to always know if it's the current version. This is especially important in rich client development, and I will tell you that it's critical that you keep customers on the current version, or at least there's a visual indicator to tell them that they're not on the current version. Now, the way that you go about this, I might mention, I don't know if you've used iTunes, but iTunes must be the most annoying piece of software on the planet. Every time you open it, every single time I open it, it seems to have a message about a newer version being available. Would you like to download it now? Now, I always download it, and nothing ever seems to change. But I kind of think that it should be done a little bit more subtly. I'll give you an example here. Here is an example of an application that we do. So the application has the version number in the title bar, always handy when someone is reporting a bug. And the other thing is there's a little cross here that indicates that you're not on the current version, but you can click here and get the new version. So it makes it fairly visible on the front screen that they're not on the current version and they should get it. If everything's okay, obviously there's a green tick. The next useful development practice is that I think that the developers should always be building a new version every day. Now, you can actually schedule this with things like Cruise Control and Visual Studio Team System. As a minimum, if you're not using one of those, it's very important that you check in everything and you compile. Now, while we're talking about this, it's very important also that developers understand that source space for your source control system is not a file share. It's not something you just check in just to make a backup. So you must compile, check all the unit tests, and check in. I believe that developers should be doing it every day. There's the odd exception where it's not possible, but usually you can comment out the piece of code that's not ready and check it in. The next development practice that is handy is when you do the setup.exe. It's not uncommon for developers to go through the whole application, be delivering zip files to testers, and at the very end, when everything's okay, they start doing their setup.exe. And they're trying to work out, how are we going to create this virtual directory? How are we going to deploy these reports to the reporting services server? All these complexities. I believe that setup should be done on the first release, and keep it simple. Work out how you're going to be doing it, but you shouldn't be trying to work out the way that you're going to deploy this at the end. Another very important piece of this is the way that you build a setup. Now, it's not uncommon for people to have a whole series of steps to make a build. What they do is they go to the assembly.info and they increment the version number. Then they make a build, they check it in, make a build. Maybe they go and they open up Wise, they increment the version number there, they compile that, then they go and copy it to a location, they open up a SQL table that has the current version number or the file name or whatever at a certain spot, and then they copy it onto some media. And it's not uncommon to see like 15, 20 steps in this process. Now, when you're getting near the very end of a release and you're getting a couple of bug reports back, you're getting a bug report, you're fixing those couple of small errors, it must be one step or very close to one step where the whole new version is done. All these processes can be automated, so you've got to work to make it automated. There's a couple of tools out there that you can use. You can use Visual Build Pro, you can use Final Builder, or you can use MS Build, or you can just use Nant. It doesn't really matter which way, but as long as you look at some of those tools and work out the best way forward. The long-term solution really is MS Build. At the moment, there's not much of a GUI for that, but it's definitely probably the way to go for the future. And my final point on development practices is the intelligence that you put in this setup.exe. I'm a fan to make the setup.exe as simple as possible. I like it to be really dumb, and all it does is it does an X copy of files. I really don't like setup.exe doing a whole lot of work. As an example, creating virtual directories, installing databases, running scripts, doing reporting services, report deployment. I like to keep all that stuff in the exe. So all it does is do an X copy. If you decide to, when you open up the application, it helps you deploy the database. It deploys the report. It checks for SharePoint if that's what's needed, etc. So if you change the location of your database or your report server or SharePoint, the application detects it's not there and asks you to go ahead and do it yourself. So hopefully you've enjoyed this part B, and I encourage you to come back and listen to part C shortly.